welcome. Today I'm here with Lisa and we'll talk about the leadership evolution, how we can nurture a growth-oriented leadership. Lisa and I have been doing many things recently. We did an event at CIF. We are going to both speak at the Dextagon AI Summit end of April. And we just want to have a 30-minute, LinkedIn Live where Lisa can share a few of the main points we will be discussing in more detail at the event. So how are you, Lisa? Thanks
Good.
for being
Good.
here.
It's been a busy morning, but it's good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I feel that. I'm good. I'm good. At a co-working space today in New York. Are you working from home?
Yeah, working from home today.
Nice. Awesome. Well, let's get right to
Yeah.
it. I have a few questions for you, and it will be a conversation as always.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start by addressing a bit the main challenges you see leaders face today. Like if you can give us two, three examples, and how do you think they can overcome them? And can they overcome them?
Well, I mean, leadership has never been easy, right? To be able to develop your vision, to communicate to a group of folks, to really help to, get the right people around you to operationalize that vision. None of that has ever been easy. But I think the added complexity right now is that so much is shifting, right? The speed of technology is incredibly quick. We're now working with multiple generations in the workforce, and they are, obviously you don't want to overgeneralize, but there are, some key differences in working in a multi-generational community. And I think, we're still on some level as a country, as a world, dealing with a level of trauma from the pandemic, from being isolated. Mental illness is, mental health is a real significant issue in a lot of spaces. And so there's so many challenges coming to a head. So leadership is hard for all of those reasons.
Mhm, mhm.
So
Wars, yeah, I mean, there's been so
yeah,
much, and especially now, with the change management around AI, like I feel like we see the world being very dichotomized as the people who are all about it and they're in the forefront and they
yeah,
want to see the world change. I just had a discussion yesterday where I was talking to someone about the research around longevity, and
Mhm.
like Peter Diamandis, who's very big on the topic of longevity, says if you live in the next 5 years, you will be able to live 500 years. And you have some people that are like, whoa, that's awesome. I can see, flying cars and all of that. And others
Yeah,
that are like, I don't even want to live that long. Like, I don't want to be part of this society anymore. There's just way too much. And people are either closing their eyes or out there trying to figure it out.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, I feel like there's just so much polarization. But which is why also it's very important as a leader, I think, to be very sensitive in the fact that
yeah,
everybody's dealing with it differently.
yeah.
So there's a lot of discussion around the different cultural competencies we have to have, and
Mhm.
uh, the empathy that's required to survive in this remote world as a leader. So how do you see leaders today working on creating these cultural competencies?
Yeah,
And have you seen maybe any examples of people doing it successfully remotely?
yeah. So, I mean, I think being able to understand that, well, one, sometimes you don't know somebody's story, right? Just because um you don't know someone's background, especially as it comes to things like class, and sometimes in terms of, immigration status or what have you. So I think there's two things that need to take place. One is, yes, leaders should definitely have diversity within their teams, right? Because we're all going to have um, uh, some aspect that we're not aware of, right? And so I think it's just planning for that and preparing for it with having diversity in every way that means in a team. I think diversity mitigates risk, right? We know this when we
Mhm.
do investments. It's the same for our teams. But the other thing is really, I think, doubling down on inclusion practices. There was a recent New York Times article where some HBR professors, it was the best definition of inclusion that I've seen. They said that inclusion is creating the conditions so that someone who's 2 or 3 um, uh, separations from you can be successful in your organization. And so I think I think those two things are really important. That constant having that diversity in the team, and then also really thinking about how inclusive your organization is, I think are the two key factors, I think, in addition to educating yourself consistently as a leader, in able to consistently create a sense of belonging for as many, for a diverse workforce, excuse me.
Yeah, and what's interesting now is so many people being solopreneurs, right? Like consultants, fractional people. There's more and more cross collaboration where I think something easy to think about but hard in practice is sometimes to think very specific examples that resonate with the person you're talking to, right? So if I'm here working in the US, let's say with someone in India, and all my examples are about like US holidays or
Yeah.
US like customs and traditions, there's immediately a disconnect. And it's so hard to create that bond through a screen anyways. So finding
Mhm.
smaller things that you can mention or bring in the discussion that make the other person at least see that you're trying to to connect can make it easier for both parties to feel a little more comfortable.
Absolutely. And I think the organizations that are doing this the best are using a combination of relationship building and data to understand who their people are. So, for example, was talking to someone who leads people in a multinational organization, not a large one, but in different countries. And just not just the holiday piece as well, but understanding things like DEI or
Mm.
employee engagement. All of those things can look a little bit differently because of um, cultures and just norms. And so just understanding that. And I think going in with a curiosity mindset, right? Being like, there's something I don't know. When you're creating whatever change initiative or plan, I think starting with the assumption of there is something I'm missing and how can I get different voices around the table to be able to stress test. And that might not change what you're doing. And I think that's where some leaders struggle. It may not change what you're doing and what you're focusing on, but it will inform how you roll something out. And that is, the majority of the battle when it comes to change management.
Yeah, 100%. And going back to what I said earlier about like this polarization, I think something I learned recently through this book, Compassion and Accountability, that I also
Mhm.
posted about from my friends at Next Element, the consulting coaching company. They really put together this like terminology to indicate that these two things are very much intertwined and can coexist. Whereas lots of leaders feel like, oh, I either I have to be super empathetic and
Mhm.
create this like nice profile that people feel trusted and then can come
Mhm.
to me for questions, or I have to be very, adamant about my KPIs and what I ask people to do, and creates more of a culture of fear.
Yeah.
So it's really not one or the other. I think
Right.
a lot of times we are afraid, like, hey, maybe if I show vulnerability, people will take advantage of me or they won't come through. But at the end of the day, we see now that shift where people feel more and more comfortable when you're being vulnerable, when they actually know who they're dealing with. And so in that concept also, when it comes to continuous learning, there's some people that think, oh, like it's either I have to provide everything through my organization, I have to provide like executive coaches, courses, systems, like mental
Yeah.
health hubs, or that's just not our culture.
Yeah.
However, there is always a middle ground. So what do you have to say about that? How can we create that culture if a leader is thinking now that they have to start from zero and they see it like, a mountain that they see a
Yeah.
company that has everything, they're like, I can't do that. How can we take more actionable steps
Yeah.
to create that culture of continuous growth and
Yeah.
learning?
So I think you've got time on your calendar already. How can we use that time on your calendar to embed learning and development? Because honestly, having a few 1% solutions, right? A few pieces of feedback that folks get and can implement is going to start the process. So it's making sure that you're giving continuous feedback to folks. And actually, I'm writing about this in my article for tomorrow. But making sure that you're giving that continuous feedback so that folks can either say, wow, you grew, or you've improved, or you hit this metric way before we thought. Let's unpack what made you so successful, right? Because if I know that, then I can keep helping you to leverage that strength. And if it's not going well, what's going on? Are there things that I don't know about? Is there friction that's happening? Or do you just need some, more focused feedback? And so that can happen because you have meetings with folks. And I think people build it up like, oh my God, I need to give this perfect feedback. And the thing is that you just have to start. And if you're listening to people, you're going to build that relationship, right? Over time, you norm. So I think that's the first piece, is using every time you're in a meeting, how can you give and ask for feedback too as a leader, right? Because if you're not asking for feedback, then it feels very one directional, which I don't think is the goal if you're building a culture of learning. I also think in this, especially for two things. One is that so much is shifting, right? So we don't have time to become experts and then teach, which is a shift. For that reason. And then also, even when it comes to things that we know are important, like durable skills and the power skills of communication and listening, we all need some level of practice, right? There's always a type of person or a situation that comes for even the most skilled communicator that they're going to be challenged at. And so what are the spaces that we allow people to practice and apply these things so that they get better, right? And I think that there's a misconception about practice that we stop when we are good enough at it. But if you look at sports athletes, if you look at comedians, right? No, people at the top are at the top of their game because they're constantly refining, right? They're refining at more of a, nuanced level than someone who's beginning, but there's such a culture of practice and feedback, and let me watch the tapes and let me review that. And I think when it comes to leadership, those are things, or leadership or doing the work, how can you have that athlete's mindset, basically, to say, this it's not personal, right? It's just, if something didn't land, what are the things that we can shift, in the same way that in the same way organizations do that for product, right? You look at product, you continuously improve, you iterate. Your relationships with people and your culture have to be treated with the same care.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love the whole athlete mindset. That's so powerful. Because indeed, like sometimes a leader might not have that person that feels comfortable, that tells them, hey, you did that, and you have to kind of check in with yourself. But the ideal, I think, is that you hire or you work with people that are also not afraid to tell you when you did something wrong, or like when you missed something. And everybody brings a different, angle and leadership style anyway. So making sure, to your point, that you also hire a variety of leadership styles in your organization is key.
Mm-hmm.
And for the continuous learning aspect, I love the fact that you also said, hey, you already have that time. It's not always about creating more time. It's about how can we change things that we're already doing to make them better. And yesterday, I had a discussion with Wagner, who will also be a Dextagon, about the fact that learning needs to be in the flow of work.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I talk to L&D people, and they're like, yeah, we don't have time to create new workshops or things like that. This, though, is not the answer. Like, you don't even have to do that, because no one cares. Like, no one will stop for 2 hours in a day and attend your workshop and suddenly become a better leader. You have to give them solutions and ways to improve while they're going through life, while they're going through work. And especially, I think a question I always get is about conflict resolution. How can you teach someone how to deal with conflict when there's no conflict around? You have to do that when they're actually experiencing it.
Right.
That's the only point that they will be opening to learning.
Yeah.
Similarly, like with sales, you're trying to sell to someone. That doesn't mean they're ready to buy, but they will be looking for what you have to offer when that acute pain arises. So I think a job of a leader is primarily to have ready like different buckets of resources
Mhm.
and actively be able to point the employee like at the right direction at the point of need. It's not having, all answers at any point, but it's about creating that community around them that they know
Mhm.
who to bring in
Right.
when the point comes.
Yeah, I think and people learn differently, right? So for some people, the 10-minute LinkedIn learning might be the thing that they really need to jumpstart. For
Yes.
someone, especially someone who's a little bit more advanced at something, can you create communities of practice?
Mhm.
I would also say like, as much as change happens with teams, there are some things that always happen, right? Like with recruitment, you're always on a call, you're always, doing phone screens. Um,
Yes.
or, if you're doing open enrollment, when that's coming, right? So what are those things that we know are either predictable because they're always happening or cyclical? And instead of talking about something in a team meeting, could we practice? Could we do a case study? Could someone bring a challenge that they're having and have the team help them to work through it? Can we have an expert come in and do something? Can you ask people? We did this a lot, especially when we were trying to lead in, a pandemic. Can someone or all of us watch a 15-minute webinar, a 30-minute webinar, and then come and discuss it or read this article and say, how does, we did this pre-pandemic, fortunately, but read an article about marketing and then said, like, how does this impact us as a recruitment team? Like, what are practices that we can start stealing? And people want to be involved, right? They don't want to be talked at. Most of the time when people aren't doing something, it's not that they don't know how, it's that they're not sure how to apply it in a specific context. And so that's where you focus your energy is the application, not on I'm doubling down on telling you the same thing that hasn't moved the needle. It's the practice piece. And and the other piece about that too is that by doing and thinking, like memory is the residue of thought. So if you're having people do something and having that active thinking, right, you're building that mental muscle.
Yes, yes. So true. What you said earlier. So my friends at Architect Ignoranti always say people want their say, not their way. Like they just want to have an opinion and be heard. And you can think about it in very simple terms. Like when you go out with a friend and you ask them, where they want to go. They won't be like mad if you end up deciding to go somewhere else, but they would be pissed if you didn't ask them and you would just say, hey, we're going there, period. It's always about just giving that option. I fully agree. Then
Yeah.
I wanted to switch a little topics to bring it to AI. I think, and we went together, Transform. You saw a lot of the discussions around the topic, and there is so much interest from like HR and L&D people to learn about this topic. But we
Mhm.
also see on the numbers that they're still slowly adapting it. That they're more on the defense. They're afraid they might lose their jobs. They don't want to take their risk. They want to be very sure about what tools they bring in their organizations.
Yeah.
They might have been burned before, and that all makes sense. But how then can you balance that in between of having a need to innovate, to be more, for instance, effective with your recruiting methods, and you have all these different asks that you have to deliver with that risk-taking mentality. So how can we help people navigate this in between states that we're in?
Yeah.
uh, yeah, and allow them to actually use AI to enhance their own leadership effectiveness.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I've noticed about most of the AI, the solutions that are out there are, and to use an education term, they're tier one supports, right? It gets to a baseline. And I think I would be cautious too. Not because I was scared of it taking my job, but just is it giving the right information or the right advice? So I think
Mhm.
about it almost like, you know, how Khan Academy used to be where you'd watch the video and then you come to class and you flip the classroom. Can you flip your meetings so that they're watching something where they're using the AI, they're thinking about how to apply it, and they bring their ideas to the meeting with the manager to say, here's what I'm thinking I do, or here's how I want to, shift the pitch a little bit, whatever that thing is, so that there's still a human safeguard. And as a manager, I would too. Like, I don't care what conference or learning you went to, like, now's the time for, right? I think it's the same principle of any learning and development is go learn, think about applying, and now come to me and let's talk about it so that we can really focus on higher level issues as opposed to starting from square one. So that's a simple way that I would start. But I would also, just to your point about the fear, the thing that I consistently hear and believe is that the only people that AI is going to replace are the people who don't know how to leverage it and use it. And so thinking about it as a capacity builder within you or your team rather than a replacement, I think is the right way to start thinking about that.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, the reason why we're also doing the AI Summit is because fundamentally today, people have been trying to figure out how to use AI for themselves, their departments, or on a personal level, but there is not really a lot of progress in how can we use AI holistically in the org? How can we, as HR or L&D, help everybody else achieve their goals?
Yeah.
And I think what for months now I've been trying to say to L&D and HR folks is that it's the best time ever to be in that role. Although it sounds scary and all of that, they have so much power in their hands to upskill themselves and then be able to upskill everybody else in the org to maintain sustainability. Or else, to your point, not only they will be replaced as individuals, but their company will not exist in a few years unless it catches up on the AI train, which is moving very fast. And I think there's endless corporate applications of AI because there's endless problems we face at work anyways. So the company that figures out a way to leverage people data, their skills, their gaps, connected with career progression and hiring needs, will be the one that will win for sure.
Yeah, and I think, releasing of some control is important here. Like, how can you create working groups to be able for people to start thinking about, like, if this is the AI technology that exists, what are the ways that you want to start utilizing this? And the part is you just have to get started. And if you're really embracing a culture of learning, you also have to embrace some mistakes. Obviously, you have to think about how do you protect against, sort of existential mistakes versus just learning mistakes. And that's just going to be you have to monitor that process pretty clearly. But Lori Mazer writes about this a lot. She does AI courses with a human touch. And I think it was 2 weeks ago in her weekly newsletter, she just talked about how do you involve the people on the ground in helping to come up with the solutions as opposed to assuming you have all the answers or need to have all the answers. I actually think, in my experience with managers and leaders, right, some people have control issues, but I think for the most part, they don't want to overly burden their staff, but kind of pulling the curtain back and letting them in on the decision making is a way to engage your team and is a way to invest them in whatever solution, if they're actually part of the co-creation.
Love it. Yeah. I think, yeah, only when you include others in the process, first of all, since management becomes easier, or else if you've been just working on something in the vacuum and then, from one day to the next, you're announcing a new AI strategy or a new tool, like, yeah, you can expect things to go smoothly. So tell me, since you work a lot with managers, like, what's your advice if someone is now starting their managerial journey or they're aspiring leaders? What would you tell them in terms of what were a couple of things that you did to improve your leadership skills when you were starting, and how maybe they can also show that through like a resume or when they're applying for a new job? How can you really show your leadership skills when you're just starting this journey?
Yeah, so there's two parts to your question. One is just how do you get ready to be a manager, and then there's the I'm applying for a leadership role. I think in terms of getting ready, hopefully your organization has a good competency map and behavioral anchors, but if not, I'm sure you can find something on Google or ChatGPT, and measure yourself against those metrics and ask other people. Like, you can do your own informal 360 on where your gaps are. And for the strengths, always think about how you're applying your strengths. Strength Finders 2.0 is great for this. How do you apply your strengths to the gap areas? But for the gap areas, who are the people that you know that are good at this stuff? And how can you shadow them or observe them and really thin slice how they're doing it, so that you can think about like really tactical ways to get better at communication or influence or inspiration. And that's the sort of low tech, no money, you have no support way. If you're able to have more support, I think, and training, I think having a coach at the beginning is really important. I've also not joked. I really think leaders being in therapy is important. And the reason being is that so much of your past relationship with work, authority, comes out in leadership, and you have to be addressing it. And coaches are very different than therapists. So I think that's another piece. If I had to focus on one skill, it would be communication, right? Because most people are getting hired to be managers are smart individual contributors. Not always, but most of the vast majority of the time, it's their struggle to communicate or to alter their communication, or listening to listen and learn, not just to respond. I would say that would be my focus area for new leaders more than anything else. Some level of strategic thinking as well, so that it's not just run the play, even though everything is telling me not to run the play. But I think a focus on communication is important. In terms of applying for leadership, I think people think that you need a title to lead. And so I want to see people who've been able to, if I'm hiring for, you know, even a senior manager role, what are the ways that you've led informally? What are the ways that you've led outside of your work as well? If you're the board chair of a nonprofit, or something along those lines, or you led a volunteer group, that tells me a lot. That can tell me a lot about your ability to influence and plan, so that people who aren't getting paid are doing those things. So I think first looking at what those related opportunities are. But most people who are applying to be a manager for the first time have led something. They might not have gotten paid for it. They may not have had an official title. But I think talking about how you identified a goal, how you created a plan, how you led people through that and supported them through. Did you have to shift your focus? How did you gather data to know if it was working? All of those things are going to be things that we're listening for in asking you about those experiences, or things that, some folks will have case studies that they ask participants to do. And so those are the skills that we're going to be looking for.
Right, and I definitely second the fact that communication is key. What I hear as a big challenge for managers is that they're in such an in-between state, right? They have to have this executive communication style to talk to leadership. They have to also be relatable to people under them, and creates a lot of tension, especially again remotely. That's becoming harder to communicate. But I think understanding also that you need to always tell yourself, who am I speaking to? Know your audience, and being very in the moment and mindful of that can help. I joked yesterday in my post about how hard it is to find an executive coach. I think the same for a therapist, because you really have to take it seriously and find someone that fits in so many different checks, right? Like, you have to find someone that you know they have like related background with you or what you're going through, and can help you, but also understand that as you evolve, maybe that relationship evolves and you might have to find someone else, and that's okay too. Like, the fact that you you're going very well with someone and you have this mentorship relationship, doesn't mean it's for life, and that's okay. You need to always know and check in with yourself, where are my gaps today and how can I fill them,
Yeah.
and find these right people, these accountability partners around you to improve. So that's I think great actually, and it's not something to be afraid of. And I agree,
Yeah.
yeah, with that. Even when a coach, they can push you where you have to be. Sometimes I think you going to a coach, but you might not even know where you want to go, and they recognize something about you and push, and you have to have trust, and you have to believe in that person that they can take you where you are meant to be at. So
Yeah.
there's a sense of, releasing control. Back to what you said earlier, you have to trust that your surroundings are also playing a huge role in your journey.
Yep. Even as a coach, I've had, done 3 and 6 months engagements. The vast majority of the time, I've taken you as far as I can take you. You need
Mm-hmm.
something different at this stage. And I think that's important to be able to know maybe I'm not in, I no longer need to figure out how to, crystallize my voice or my vision. Now I really need support on operationalizing my
Yeah.
vision. And those are often two different people. And so having that diversity and good coaches and therapists are not, they know, they also want to practice a very specific type of coaching or therapy. And if it's not right for you, then you should find somebody who is right. I know that I really love coaching new leaders or leaders who are taking on new challenges, to help them to navigate and be that safe space. And usually in 6 months, they have clarity on who they are, how they want to push forward, and they're ready for something different. And that's great. That means I've done my job as a coach.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for the talk today. I know we'll continue and share more insights post Dextagon as well.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you all for listening, and join us on the 9th for our next one. Thank you, Lisa. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.